Everything you have been told about death begins with a single assumption. Consciousness is a byproduct of a biological machine. Once the machine stops, awareness flickers out. That explanation is tidy, but it leaves too many anomalies on the table. Near-death reports that match across cultures, identical visionary terrain described in Tibetan monasteries and in modern psychedelic labs, moments during cardiac arrest when patients observe the room in detail even though the cortex is silent. Taken together, those data points suggest that awareness detaches. It doesn't disappear. Tibetan adepts mapped that detachment more than 1,000 years ago in the Bardo Thodol. They were not writing myth, they were writing an operating manual. The text says the instant the heart stops, ordinary perception collapses and a field of unconditioned radiance flares into view, the clear light. If the dying person can remain utterly open, identity dissolves and the cycle of rebirth ends. In practice, almost no one recognizes the radiance because the reflex to cling is stronger than the impulse to let go. The mind recoils, reaches for something familiar, and the radiance dims. That single hesitation drops the traveler into the second bardo, a zone of self-generated visions. The peaceful figures that appear first are projections of unfulfilled longing. The wrathful forms that follow are disowned impulses solidified by fear. All of it is mind-made, yet it feels more solid than physical life because there is no body now to dilute the projection. If the traveler realizes this theater is internal, the images collapse and liberation is still possible. Most pursue or resist the visions instead, and the momentum of unfinished emotion pulls them into the third bardo, where awareness gravitates toward the vibration of a compatible womb. A new biography begins, the old one is forgotten. Modern research keeps colliding with the same architecture. Cardiac arrest survivors talk about a boundary of brilliant, all-encompassing light that conveys absolute completeness. If they cross it, the report ends. Those who return say a half-formed thought about family or unfinished work yanked them backward, cling and recoil, exactly as the Tibetans predicted. High-dose DMT studies at Imperial College London show volunteers entering realer-than-real realms inhabited by luminous beings that morph between benevolent and intimidating aspects, shaped by the subject's emotional state from one moment to the next. When neuroscientists graph the brain during those sessions, default mode activity, the circuitry that sustains personal identity, drops out, then reorganizes in novel patterns afterward. It mirrors what the Bardo text insists. The mind's contents reassemble according to the imprint of prior habits. If these parallels are accurate, preparing for death becomes less about last-minute ritual and more about daily habit. A mind that practices loosening its grip when disappointment, praise, or anxiety arise is rehearsing for the first flash of clear light. A person who notices how emotions color perception is less likely to mistake post-mortem visions for external facts. Scientific language frames the same point differently. Plasticity follows attention. Repeatedly redirecting awareness away from compulsive storylines and back into raw presence strengthens the neural pathways that can stay calm when the cortex loses oxygen. No guru or checklist required. Only the quiet discipline of noticing when narrative tightens and letting it unwind before it hardens into certainty. Few commit to that discipline, so the statistical outcome is predictable. The majority slip past the light, tumble into their own projections, and ride the current toward another incarnation. The cycle is not punishment, it is momentum. Karma, in this frame, is neither moral bookkeeping nor cosmic judgment. It is stored tendency. What you rehearse you repeat, whether in a boardroom conflict, a breakup, or the interval between heartbeats and brain silence. Break the rehearsal in life and the trajectory after life changes automatically. From here the conversation usually turns to comfort or denial, anything to soften the implication that each ordinary reaction is rehearsal for the only transition guaranteed to arrive. Tibetan teachers give a different suggestion. Treat every threshold, waking from sleep, losing a job, moving cities, as a living bardo. Notice the reflex to clutch at the past or lunge at the future. Notice the instant of raw openness before the next identity crystallizes. That brief opening is the same opening that appears at death. Recognize it now and recognition later becomes reflexive rather than theoretical. Science may not frame the practice in mystical terms, but the findings line up. Long-term contemplatives show reduced activity in the brain's narrative network and heightened connectivity in regions that register present experience without overlay. They report less fear of death, not from belief but from familiarity with states where self-story pauses. NMRI scans confirm that the skilled mind slips in and out of selfless awareness during life. There is no reason to assume it cannot do so during death if the habit is ingrained. None of this is morbid. It is logistical. The single event no one bypasses arrives without warning. Ignoring it until the final breath is a strategy with a perfect failure rate. The Tibetan manual is blunt: practice now or improvise later. Modern data add a footnote: improvise under neurological duress and the mind will default to its strongest habit, whatever that habit is. That is the core principle. The rest, rituals, iconography, debate over reincarnation mechanics, are secondary. If you want the mind to meet the clear light without panic, train it to recognize spaciousness whenever it appears. If you want to avoid drowning in post-mortem visions, learn to spot projections during waking conflict. If you want to reduce the pull toward another womb, lessen unfinished craving before the heart stops. Nothing exotic, just consistency. The light collapses and awareness tumbles into the second interval. Tradition calls it the Konyi Bardo, the landscape of intrinsic form. Here, mind is no longer confronted by formless radiance. It is inundated by its own vivid contents. In the first 49 moments, vision cascades. Serene archetypes appear, each one a pristine facet of awareness itself. They carry implements of wisdom: a mirror, a lotus, a wheel. If attention rests equanimously, their brilliance is recognized as self-radiance and dissolves. For most, the encounter is too intense. A subtle recoil, barely a thought, only the trace of a preference, splits the display into duality. What was a single field now feels like a presence facing an observer. That sliver of distance turns luminosity into otherness, and the serene figures mutate. Implements become weapons, colors darken, sound thickens into roar. The peaceful deities have not left, they are simply perceived through the lens of aversion. Neuroscience has language for the same slide. High-field fMRI of volunteers on intravenous DMT shows a rapid collapse of default mode network coherence followed by flooding of unimodal sensory cortices. Subjects speak of fractal palaces and entities made of sound. When the fusiform face area sparks, geometric color tiles morph into eyes, then into beings that seem to address the traveler personally. Stanislav Grof noted the same phenomenon decades earlier in LSD psychotherapy. Under high entropy, the psyche externalizes its contents as autonomous figures. Whether we label them wrathful deities or hyperdimensional clowns, the mechanism is identical. Interoceptive data gains the vividness normally reserved for exteroception, and the mind mistakes its own signal for an independent environment. If the subject remembers this, the vision becomes a teaching. If not, terror tightens the loop. The text says that at this point a whisper can still reverse the descent. Recognize, these appearances are your own projections. Seasoned psychonauts report a parallel rescue cue. When a sitter reminds them that everything arises within awareness, panic drops, forms lose solidity, and the session tilts back toward clarity. The instruction is not philosophical. It is a neurological interrupt that stops the amygdala from locking in a threat response. Every time you manage the same interrupt in daily life, during an argument, inside an anxiety spike, you are installing circuitry that may fire in the Konyi Bardo before fear seals the next layer of illusion. If fear does seal it, the display shifts again. Time stretches, landscapes condense, desire reasserts itself. Tibetan sources describe karmic panoramas, scenes of past deeds, unresolved impulses, flashes of pleasure, flashes of shame. Contemporary near-death narratives echo the sequence. A panoramic life review in which one feels every action's impact on others from their perspective instantaneously. Researchers at NYU studying cardiac arrest patients find the same pattern and note that subjects emerge with lasting reductions in death anxiety and increased altruism, as if the review is not punishment but feedback. At the far end of the visionary cascade comes gravitational pull. Awareness, stripped of its usual body but still vibrating with preference, drifts toward resonance pockets. parents in sexual union, wombs whose emotional tone matches the traveler's dominant state. The Sipa Bardo begins, gestation of a new storyline. Modern science can track none of this directly, yet epigenetic studies show that stress signatures pass through sperm and ova, writing emotional patterns into embryos before the neocortex forms. Myth and data converge again. Unresolved emotional charge seeks a biological niche that will let it unfold. Where does that leave a living listener? Not with checklists but with orientation. Know that every surge of attraction or aversion during the day is a rehearsal. Notice how quickly mind turns images into threats or saviors, how reflexively it inserts a watcher separate from the scene. Each time you catch the move and let the image reintegrate, you shorten the half-life of the same reflex in death. When a memory surfaces and tightens the chest, meet it rather than exile it. Doing so drains color from the panoramas that would replay later. When gratitude or compassion swells, abide there long enough to feel the body chemistry shift. Those are the signatures that respond to the clear light instead of recoiling. None of this abolishes grief or removes mystery. It simply positions you as participant rather than passenger. The manuals insist that the cycle need not continue by default. It continues because habit carries more momentum than insight. Reduce the momentum now and the doorway on the last exhale may stay open long enough for recognition. When the pull toward a new life gathers strength, it feels less like decision and more like gravity. Tibetan commentators describe it as a wind that rises from inside one's own mind stream, pushing awareness toward scenes that match its unfinished business. In everyday terms, that wind is simply habit. Spend a lifetime circling the same fears, the same cravings, the same stories about who wronged you or what will finally make you whole, and those currents dig channels. At death they carry you without effort, the way river water falls along a course it carved centuries earlier. This is why the last phase, the doorway into rebirth, is pictured as a mirror. What appears in that mirror is not judgment from outside. It is the momentum you built with every thought, word, and deed. The tradition says that as soon as the reflection fascinates you, you merge with it, and a new biography begins. Modern research on memory hints at the same mechanism. The networks that fire most often during life are the easiest to reignite when the brain loses its usual anchors. Whether those networks play an anthem of fear or a song of ease is decided long before the final breath. Recognizing this turns preparation into something practical. You do not need esoteric rituals or exotic retreats. You need to observe which inner movies demand your attention and learn how to let them finish without pressing replay. When anger surges, see how quickly it recruits the body, jaw, fist, stomach, and notice that the heat dissolves if you do not feed it. Each time you allow a wave to pass without grabbing it, the neural groove softens, and the wind that would have pushed you later loses speed. The same principle applies to joy. When kindness stirs, stay with it until the warmth is unmistakable. That imprint becomes a magnet in the borderless state. It can tilt you toward the clear light instead of toward another circuit of confusion. Sleep is a nightly rehearsal. Just before dreams start, the sense of I am this body in this room fades. Most nights you slip into stories and forget. On rare occasions you realize within the dream that you are dreaming. That glimpse is called lucid awareness, and it trains the same reflex you will need in the bardos. If you wake from a nightmare and tell yourself, it was only a dream, you have already practiced the move that dissolves wrathful visions after death. Treat each morning as proof that you can come back from a world that felt solid only minutes earlier. Breath provides another rehearsal. Follow one exhale all the way out and pause before the next inhale begins. In that pause there is nothing to grasp. No role, no plan, just awareness resting in itself. It lasts a second, yet it mirrors the clear light. Become intimate with that gap and the first stage of death will be familiar territory rather than shock. None of this needs mystical language. You can call it nervous system training, cognitive flexibility, or simple presence. The labels do not matter, the repetition does. 5 minutes of quiet attentiveness each day does more to reshape the post-mortem landscape than hours of speculation about what might happen later. The mind that returns to its own center while alive recognizes the center when the body falls away. What, then, should you expect if you take this seriously? Life will still deliver losses, praise, illness, delight. The difference is that you meet them as weather, not verdicts. When the doctor calls with results, you feel the stomach drop, but another layer of you is already watching the sensation rise and fall. That watcher is the part that can stand in the clear light without panic. Cultivate it now and it will stand for you when the brain's electricity flickers for the last time. The great mistake is to hear all this and turn it into another anxiety project, another task on an endless list of self-improvement goals. The point is not to perfect anything, it is to become familiar with the fact that every scene, including the one in which you try to perfect yourself, passes. Once that familiarity is steady, the bardos have nothing to use as bait. Visions will still appear, but fascination will not lock on. Winds will still blow, but channels will be shallow. And if you do none of this, then the teachings still apply, you will simply explore them through repetition. A new cradle, a new language, a fresh set of hopes and resentments. Eventually another moment of dissolution, another chance to recognize the mirror. The cycle is not punishment, it is persistence. You have as many attempts as you need. The question is how many you want. The purpose of a message like this is to reduce the number. If something in you nods at these words, that is the part ready to step off the carousel. Let it steer more often. When the day closes and the mind replays its worries, invite the clear light by resting in the pause after exhale. When strong emotion flashes, spot the moment just before the story attaches. In that instant, freedom is already present. Stay there a heartbeat longer each time. Do this and death becomes a passage rather than a verdict. The light will open, you will know it. Forms will dance, you will bow without fear. Doorways will appear, you will walk past them until no doorway is needed. The wheel will turn for others but not for you. You will have seen the dream for what it is and the dream will release you.